3606.87, and I got logged out. I'm super excited to do a tutorial for Bot Games Season 3 Financial Transaction Validation. This is one of those really fun challenges that we came up with a while ago, and I've been really excited, like waiting for the right moment to put this one out, because this is a challenge that frustrates some developers. And the skills that you learn in completing this challenge are super important in being able to build resilient, production-ready automations. Sounds good? All right, let's take a look at the challenge description and learn a little bit about what we're going to get ourselves into today. So the objective here is that we want to validate all of Foodmart's transactions in Rusty Bank to get the supplier name for each. So there's going to be a series of financial transactions. You can see a couple of them right here, right? And what we need to do is for every one of those transactions that shows up, we need to log in to Rusty Bank, which is the banking provider for Foodmart Grocery Corp. We need to look up that transaction. We have the details like the payment account, the payment date, and the payment amount. We need to look up that transaction and figure out the supplier name, okay? So for each of those, we're gonna pull back that data. Now, where this gets really tricky, Rusty Bank isn't exactly known for being the most reliable banking provider. And we're gonna see that the Rusty Bank application crashes pretty frequently, right? And this, may seem like a kind of fun challenge, and obviously we're having fun with it as well. But this is realistic of when you're developing automations and a page doesn't load, an application takes longer to come up than you expect. As you're transitioning from one page to another, maybe it's not moving as smoothly and as seamlessly as it once did when you were creating the bot. And so it's really important to learn these kind of skills so that as you're building an automation and as you want it to be resilient and not having people call you at 3 a.m. because the automation didn't run, you need to learn these kind of principles and these kind of practices to be able to include error handling, include concepts of retries left within your automation. So, a couple tips for this one. Number one, there's obviously more than one way to solve this. We'll talk about a couple different solution approaches at the end of this video. So if you want to skip ahead, you can jump right there. We'll talk about some of the approaches. I'll also talk about why we're taking the approach that I'm taking to show you how to build this as a solution. The other big tip here is make sure that you're using your error handling. That's the whole purpose of this exercise. Each of these bot games challenges that we put out, we're trying to teach a specific principle and a specific skill set that we want you to learn, right? In this one, we want you to focus on how you can use error handling to overcome some of the challenges that are presented by Rusty Bank. Finally, consider some of the pros and cons of various approaches. Again, we'll talk about this here at the end of the video, but I've seen some people get really good times, but at the cost of their code being a total mess and really difficult to maintain going forward. So I personally prefer the simplicity of building an automation and keeping the number of actions and the commands as little as possible. I prefer that kind of simplicity. I prefer readability over going insanely fast. So keep that in mind as you're building out this automation. Sound good? All right, let's jump into this one and we'll do a live build for the financial transaction validation. So I've logged into my Automation 360 control room here. I also have the challenge page itself up. So this is what it looks like. We've got a total of 12 financial transactions that we're gonna have to take care of. Notice that every time you refresh this page, it does give you different financial transactions. So we can't just like try and do this and then refresh at the last second. We do have to read these every single time. The other thing we have here is the Rusty Bank login. So if I click on this one, we can log into this application and we've got the login details here. Obviously we'll want to store these as a part of our automation so that it's able to do this login for us. But I'm going to log in here, right? And so this is a banking app. It's again, obviously all fake. It's simulated. As I go to these various account pages, I can see all of these transactions. I can look up data. I can do the search based on an amount, right? 3606.87. And I got logged out, right? So what happens here is that this page times out pretty frequently and we get this 503 error. And the way to get back into it is we have to log back in. So just be aware of that. That's the point of this exercise. We want to try and get as many of these financial transactions validated before the 503 error comes, and then we want to make sure that our automation is able to handle this 503 error and deal with the 503 train that we see right here. So hopefully this isn't getting you stuck up too much, but we'll show you exactly how to solve this one now. So I'm going to go back to my control room. I have a folder that was called Bot Games already. I don't have anything in here for season 3, so I'm going to create a new subfolder that we'll call season_3. Again, when you're creating automations, be sure that you're naming them in appropriate subdirectories, right? Notice here I've got like bot games and then season 3. Yeah, that kind of makes sense for bot games. But if you're doing this for a real customer or at your own organization, you'll probably want to create some subdirectories like, hey, I'm going to start with the, let's say, business group or functional group name, and then inside of that it might be the use case or the functional area, and then inside of that I might have my master bot and all subtasks. Speaking of which, this is an automation where I strongly suggest using subtasks, and I'm going to show you how to do that, and I'll show you how and why I decided to create those. So what I'm going to do here is click create a bot. We'll create our first automation. I'm going to call this one financial transaction_master. I do that just so that I can see, like, if I'm looking at a folder of automations, like the master lets me know that this is the main automation here, and then anything else that might be in there as far as bots or even processes, I would know that those are references or subtasks. Now, when I'm building out an automation, I always start with the steps, right? The steps enable me to basically build the skeleton or the general flow of how my automation looks. The other reason I really like steps is because, well, I'm going to put 3 over here. When I need to have a conversation with someone who may be not necessarily familiar with Automation Anywhere development, but they understand the general process flow, if I've named my steps appropriately, as I minimize these and just look at them, I can generally explain the process to someone and exactly what's happening through just looking at these steps. So it's almost like a process flow diagram that maybe I could go over with a business analyst or, you know, my customer who may be a business user in a functional area. I can show them what the process looks like. We can talk through it so they have an understanding and a view of what's happening within the automation. It also helps me because admittedly I'm awful at commenting my code. Steps is a great way to kind of force me to do that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one launch and login, and that's going to enable us to launch our challenge pages and also do the login to the bank. The next step is going to be loop and lookup. Oh man, I just noticed that I'm going all L's here. What is a good, I don't know, a good L for submit. Let's do launch into submission. That's close enough. I can't think of another L word here. I only noticed that I was doing that alliteration. So launch into submission. Kind of a weird one, but that's fine. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we want to launch our challenge page. I've got the URL right here. We also have that in the description below, so if you want to check that out, you'll be able to follow along with me. Again, the intention with these videos is not so that I can make everyone watch me build bots, but I want you to build these along with me so you can kind of understand my thinking process as I'm going through and building out an automation. What are the things I'm looking for? How am I organizing my thought process to build this out? And I'll show some tips and tricks along the way. For browser, I'm always very specific to make sure that I'm selecting the browser that I want. I don't leave it at default just in case the bot runner or machine that this is going to be executed at is ever set to a different default. I'm going to fill in my URL right there and hit save. Likewise, I'm going to do this for Rusty Bank. If I right click here and say copy link address, I can get the address for Rusty Bank. So I'm going to copy this action and just duplicate it, and I'll launch Rusty Bank. What I'm going to do actually, let's see, do I have this up? I want Rusty Bank to be on a new tab of an existing window. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to select the financial transaction validation, which is the window I have open right here. I want Rusty Bank to be a tab of that same window. You could do it in a different window, that's totally fine. Functionally, it's going to pretty much be the exact same thing, but I do want that on a separate tab. So there we go. This will just launch those two pages and enable me to get to the login. We'll test that by closing this. What we should see is we have a new window, which is my challenge page itself, and then a secondary tab that opens up that is for the Rusty Bank, and we're good to go. Now, I tested that because I want to do the login for Rusty Bank. Now, if we think about how our automation is going to work, right? We're going to try to look up a bunch of these transactions. When and if, it's not if, it's when. When we get to a point where Rusty Bank has that 503 error, I'm going to want to come back to this login page to redo my login so I can resume where I was before, right? So because of that, I'm going to build the Rusty Bank login into a subtask. So I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to create a new automation here, and I'm going to call this financial transaction underscore Rusty login. Okay. So this one doesn't have to be terribly complex, but it will enable me to use this in multiple parts within my automation instead of just copying code from one to another. Additionally, if I had other applications that I was building or other automations I was building that use Rusty Bank, I could reuse that over and over. So what we'll do here is I'm going to, obviously this page has already launched. I've just dragged it over to the other window, so we're good there. What I'm going to do is do the login. So I'm going to go to recorder and capture, and I'll put this back over here so we can all see it together. But for my browser, I'm going to hit the refresh windows here. It will find Rusty Bank, and then I'll capture object. I'm going to grab the email address field, and this will enable me to do the login to that email address. Okay. When it comes to filling in this data, right, I'm going to set text. I'm just going to hard code these right here. Not a best practice, admittedly. The best way to do this, if you're really going to have a robust solution, is to store these in a credential vault and then reference that credential, right? So I would just select it right here. And that way my information is stored securely. I don't have to worry about it. The purpose of this exercise, though, is to solve this challenge. So I'm going to show you just hard coding it. Again, if this is a bot that I'm going to run all the time and I really depend on it, and the login credentials aren't just blatantly in plain text right here, then I'm going to do that differently. But for right here, we're just going to hard code these in. All right, I'm going to copy that action, and I will recapture to get to the password field. And my action to take is going to be set text again. Now notice that the field looks a little bit different this time. It's because that Automation Anywhere has detected that that particular field is a password object. So it gives me different values here, right? Like it's coaching me like, hey, are you sure you want to use a credential here? But I am going to use insecure string. So we'll come back to, whoops, not that one, this one. I'm going to grab what that password is right here. Make sure you get that trailing dash. And we'll switch back to our code, and that will be saved as an insecure string. Again, it gives me the extra warning to say the value provided here is not encrypted. Use a credential vault to securely store that. Again, totally get it, and in real builds, that's what I'm going to do. The last thing I'm going to do here, I'll drag another capture action. I will select my Rusty Bank login and hit capture. I'm going to click that login button because that's going to allow me to log back in. Cool. So we have the Rusty login done. I'm going to close this. Actually, we should probably run it just to make sure that it works. I do need to set this as a click. I forgot that part. Let's just run this real quick just to make sure the login works. But ultimately, we'll be referencing this logic a couple times throughout the automation. So as long as it's working once, it should be working in all reference points. All right, let's go back here. That one's good. I'll close that. I actually don't think that we've done any tutorials that show subtasks yet, so this will be the first. Okay, we want to log in now. Now we've already created a subtask here, so what I'm going to do is select the taskbot package and the run action. I'm going to drop that right there. It's going to ask me which taskbot do you want to execute. I will hit browse. Here it's going to show me that same folder I was already working in. So financial transaction underscore Rusty login, I'll hit choose. If I had input values that were defined within that automation, I could fill those in here. So commonly, if I'm going to do a login automation like that, I would actually just set the input fields as like username and password, and then I could map values directly from a parent bot or a parent automation or a master bot to that subtask, and I would map those here. But again, we didn't build it this way. We're just doing ours kind of the quick and dirty, get that login done. So there's nothing to map. You also have the ability to map output values. So if any variable in my subtask is marked as an output, I can have that sent up to my parent, and then I could use that. So if I needed the subtask to do something, manipulate data, and come back to me, I would have the ability to do that. All right, our launch and login part is done, so that is taken care of. The next thing we need to do is start looping through our transactions. So let's go back to our page right here. So we've got a total of 12 transactions here. And it would be super easy to be able to just set up a loop that goes through 12 iterations and know that I'm going to grab one of these different transactions each time. I want to make our code here a bit more dynamic, and mainly so we can just talk about a particular topic. And that is running some JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is go to inspect here, and I can see here the code for this page, right? And I'm kind of inspecting the different objects here. And if I click right here, this is the object for that card, right? And if I come down here, here's the next card, and then this row has 2 cards as well, right? So I can see all of that. What I want to do is I want to have some JavaScript that will enable me to count the number of cards of this type on this page. So I can see the class here is financial validation underscore card. What I'm going to do is copy that. And I'm going to go over to console, because this is where, like, if I'm going to write some JavaScript that I'm going to use as a part of my bot build, I always start with the console because it enables me to kind of test that out and see if it's going to work. So if I type in document here, notice it's highlighting everything. It's also doing a sense of IntelliSense, letting me kind of auto-complete what I'm looking at. I want to do, let's say, query, capital S, selector. I'm going to do query selector all. Inside of that, what I want to do is I'm going to type a single quote, or actually I'll do another quote here to close it. I'm going to type dot, and then I'm going to paste in that class that we used, which was financial validation underscore card. And that came from right here, right? I see the class here. I see that this has the exact same class. Those are CSS classes. They're used so that we can apply the same kind of design and styling across different objects on a page. So I'm saying query selector, and here I can say dot length. And again, IntelliSense kind of filled that in for me automatically. If I hit enter here, I can see that it's coming back and saying 12. So it's telling me that there are 12 objects that match this query here, this CSS selector. There are 12 objects that match that on the page. So we're going to use that exact line. So I'm going to copy that. Again, we'll put this in the details below so that you can do the same thing. I'm going to use this as a part of my build so that I can figure out how many cards there are. And this enables me to make my build a bit more dynamic so that if next time I load the page, there's 10 cards, my bot will still work the same way. Again, we're talking all about resilient automations in this one. So if I go to browser package and then run JavaScript action, I'm going to put that right here. Again, I can choose which tab this is going to work off of. Let's see, should be financial transaction validation, I believe. Yeah, this one. And then here I have the ability to either execute an existing JavaScript file, a JS file, or I can enter a manual script. I'm going to put a manual script here, which is that exact query that we just ran in the console. And if I come here, I can choose how I want to save that out. Notice I have the ability to save this out in a number of different formats as far as variables. We know this is going to come back as a number. I want it represented as a number so that we can use this as our iterator count for the loop. So what I'm going to do here is just say n count of transactions. And I'll hit create and select. That was a little bonus tip. Obviously, if you wanted to just set a loop and make it hard-coded 12, that would work for this too. But this is a way to make your automations a bit more dynamic. All right, so I've selected a loop here. I want to loop through all 12 of those cards. Here it says loop for n number of times. That's fine. I'm going to switch this and I'll press F2 here. This is where I'm going to fill in my in count of transactions and hit OK. And then my current value, which is going to be my current iterator, I'm just going to call this one lowercase n counter. And basically the very first time this runs, it'll be 1. The second time it'll be 2, etc., etc. So that enables me to know what card I'm on. And I'll use that as I try to extract data from these different cards. All right. What we're going to do next is start to actually extract some data from the cards themselves. So I'm going to go back to Browser, Financial Transaction Validation, and hit Capture Object. I want payment amount for sure. So I'm going to highlight over this one and click. And while that's going on, I'm going to open up a Notepad document and make sure, yeah, my font size is pretty reasonable here. If I scroll down here, I can see a bunch of details related to my particular object here. I've got a DOMX path, I have an HTML ID. Either of those would be fair game to use here. What I'm going to do is, let's say payment amount, and then I'm going to put in the DOMX path. Okay, so we can see the DOMX path, and basically the DOMX path is, hey, from the very root of this document, what is the path you would have to follow to get to this particular input or this particular field, right? So it's inside the body, it's inside the second div, the first div inside that div, the first div inside that div, right? We can go on, but it's the full path to that particular object. The reason I'm highlighting that is we're going to do the same thing for the payment amount on card 2. Okay, let's copy that DOMX path. And what we want to see is where there may be a pattern of incrementing values. Now this gets a little bit trickier because when we do it again on card 3, we're now into a new row. So we want to see what the impact is of this. We have a couple different ways we could approach this. Okay, so if we see here, I was in div 1 and then div 2. So this is my first 2 cards. Now I'm in the first card of the next row, and notice that this increments and this goes back to 1. So it makes looping through this slightly more challenging if we stick to the DOMX path approach. You may have also noticed that the HTML ID has also been pretty static, right? The first one was payment amount 1, second one was payment amount 2. So it's actually going to be easier for us to use that value plus our counter value to find the object that we're looking for. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this down caret arrow. I'm going to uncheck the DOMX path. I'm going to uncheck the path value down here. Everything else we can leave alone. What I am going to change here is the HTML ID. So the payment amount is correct, and that's what I want to iterate through. What I want to add to this is $in. Here we have counter, which is my iterator. So again, the very first time this is going to be a 1. It gives me an error here though, and it says this is an invalid expression. And that's because if we see at the beginning here, it's expecting that this is going to be a string, not a string mixed with numbers. So what we need to do is I'll type dot, and then here we can see, again, IntelliSense kind of helping us out. I'm going to do number to string. That's going to convert my number value in line to a string. And so the very first time we run this, it should be the payment amount 1. The next time it goes through this loop, payment amount 2, payment amount 3, right? So it's going to go on and on like that. I'll hit save, and we should be good. We can test that real quickly. Oh, I do need to take an action here as well. My action is going to be to get property. How do I know which property to get? If I scroll down on this, I can see that there is a value that should be like inner HTML or HTML inner text. What was the value we just cloned on that third card? Because we can kind of go backwards. 364.52. So we want to see where there's a value that's 364.52. Here, HTML value. That's the value that I want to extract. So I'm going to select HTML value from this list. Boom. There we go. So it's going to select the HTML value. I need to say where I want to put that. I know that my head is probably in the way, so let me scroll up here. Well, I can't really scroll very well. If I move this over, what you'll see is at the very bottom, I can select which variable I want to store that to. I'm going to create a new variable that I will call S because it is a string, even though it's technically a number value. We don't need to make any calculations on it. So I'm going to call this S current amount. And we'll hit save, or create and select, and then save. To test this, I'm going to get the message box up here. And we just want to show whatever that value is. We should see that it kind of iterates through our entire list of cards there, and will show us what the value is. And again, when I'm building out these automations, I'm frequently doing this kind of testing. I'll use message boxes. Just make sure that you delete them right after, because what you don't want is a message box that doesn't automatically clear itself left into a production automation, because that's no bueno. Okay, so my login happened. Now we should be going, oh, it's going to do the login, sorry. My page load happened. There it found the very first value. Again, this is the value coming from card 1. There's the value from card 2, card 3, so we're good, right? We have a systematic way for being able to get those values. And again, I'm going to delete this value because we don't need that. All right, technically you could grab this secondary data as a payment amount and do a lookup on both. I'm just going to, or I'm sorry, the payment date. I'm just going to leave it at this. Now, the other part of data that we do need to grab here though is the payment account, because if we looked in Rusty Bank, and I think we just got logged out or errored out, I do have to select the account number in the top left corner as I'm looking for these transactions, right? I can't just search them from one searchable place. I have to go to the specific account. And this is where our code is going to get a little bit fancy. So let me go back to our automation here. The first thing we want to do is capture that same value. So let's go financial transaction validation, capture object. I'm going to select the payment account, even though I kind of have it highlighted here already. It's not going to matter. And this one follows that same pattern that the first one did. The HTML ID always increments. Again, you probably won't find that necessarily in real production applications. You'll have to get a little bit fancy with the way that you do your DOMX path and know how you're looping through this. It's not impossible to do. It just means you have to have a couple counter variables going at the same time that you keep incrementing. But we're going to set ours like this. So I'm going to come down here. I won't do the testing that we did across all of them before. Because we know how this one works. I'm just going to come here, do the exact same thing we just did, $in counter, and again I will do inside of that $, dot number to string. Just like the last one, we're going to grab a value. We want to grab the value of HTML value right here. So I'll select that. Let's say get property. Select HTML value from this dropdown. Technically, I believe you can just type this in. I prefer to always select it from this dropdown because I don't want to screw up my typing here or spell something wrong and have that be the error. For my variable down here at the bottom right, I'm going to create another one. I'm going to call this one S current account. I think we called the last one current amount, so this will be in line with what we were doing with our variable naming. Again, always good to be consistent about the way that you name variables. All right, so when we get to this point, we have, looks like there's 2839, 3842, 2147. I think there's a total of 4 different account types. We want to click on the appropriate account in Rusty Bank so that we can kind of navigate to that right page. So I'm going to copy this, I'll paste it. I'm going to have this recapture open, but what we need to do is actually do our login back at Rusty Bank. So go back to this login. None of those are correct. It's going to be this one. Actually, I think I have this on the keyboard. Or there, nope, all the way back here. That one and this one. And if I hit login, I'm going to swap back to my session here. I'm going to refresh browser. Now I see that I'm at Rusty Bank. Technically, I don't want to be at Rusty Bank Home. I just want to be Rusty Bank Star because I want it to be dynamic. Rusty Bank probably logged out. Nope. All right, let me hit recapture object. I grab 2839 checking account. Now, that click is good only if I'm using the checking account for 2839, right? If I just left it here at HTML inner text, I don't think that's going to be reliable enough for me to be able to hit that object every single time because I've got a path that's a consideration. I also have the DOMX path. So what we're going to do here is actually store this in a dictionary. And I'll show you why here in a second. So what I'm going to do is create a new dictionary variable and select the type as dictionary. I'm going to call this one D account DOMX path. And what I'll do is I'm going to put in, not that, I'm going to put in the actual account numbers, right? So here's, let's say checking 2839 is one. I have another one that is savings 3842. The order of these really doesn't matter because a dictionary is just key value pairs, right? So the order doesn't matter. When I look something up, I'm going to be looking it up by the key, not by the value. We don't have 2147 on there yet, so I'll add that. And then there's one more. There we go. 4513. We don't have that one either. Boom. So we got all those. Now we have all of our keys defined. What we don't have defined yet is our values. And right now I left that blank. I'll come back to that in just a second. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste into my dictionary. This is for 2839. I'm going to paste in the DOMX path as the value. Now, that seems a little bit confusing. Why would we do that? The reason we're doing that is instead of having the DOMX path like this, what I'm going to do is press F2 and I'll choose current account. Okay, so stick with me here. What's going to happen, and I'll uncheck these other values because they are not relevant or we won't need them. We're good there. Okay, so what's going to happen here is as we're iterating through each of these cards, right? For each card, we're going to have a different payment account. And associated with each payment account is going to be a DOMX path to where that account is located on our menu bar for this application. So I don't have to have a bunch of if statements that say like if account is checking 2839, then click here. If account is 2147, then click here. I'm doing it all in that dictionary. And I could be more dynamic with my dictionary and add objects to it later if I needed to, so that if we ended up with 6 accounts in the future, but right now we only have 4, I could be much more dynamic. So I'm going to say click here. Okay. What I want to do is we want to get the other DOMX paths for those other accounts. So we got 2839. I'll get my, go back to my notepad here because we're going to try and do this quickly before the application closes itself again. I'll copy these other guys out here. So there's my savings, my checking, and my credit card. Okay. We'll leave that open. Again, I've just pasted them over here so we have a reference to them, and I'm going to create a blank line below each one. I'm going to log back into good old Rusty Bank where I keep getting logged out. And let's scroll back to our clipboard here. There's my login. I'm going to right click and say inspect right here. Yeah, that's the link. I'm going to copy XPath. I'll put that for my savings. That was 2147. Shoot, I gotta go more quickly. All right, let's quickly grab these. I'll leave this window open so that we have it. Let's log back in. This is probably the most frustrating part about the entire challenge, is making sure that you get the values out that you need, and we'll have to do the same thing again when we go through the process of searching that table and extracting our data. But this is the most frustrating part of this build, is trying to go through here and grab these values. This is 3842. I'm going to say copy XPath. And we've got one more, but we've established the pattern already. 2147 is second. All right, so let me come back here and we'll finish this up. So we've got those two. 2147 is second. If I go back and look at my screenshot on this, I'm going to cancel this real quick. I see credit card 4513 is at the bottom, so I know that's going to be the next iteration for this. So I'll copy this guy, and it's going to be 3 right here. So now all I need to do is just finish filling in my dictionary. So I'll come back to my dictionary. 3842 is going to be this path. 2147 is going to be this path. And 4513 will end in a 4, not a 3. I had that wrong. So that is that path. All right, so we did these a little bit out of order. That's really not going to matter though, because we're concerned about the functionality here. Okay, so once we've got that, we need to log in, and then we're going to have our, we're going to have to do our recorder to basically enable us to capture going through these different pages and searching for the object. So what I'm going to do, or searching for the actual transaction based on the amount. What I'll do here is add another capture action. Browser, I'm going to select Rusty Bank Star. We don't have one up yet, so let's see. I'm going to right click here and open automation in new tab. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the season 3 folder. I've got my Rusty login. I'm just going to keep this up in the background because I'm tired of having to type that username and password over and over. So I'm going to let the bot do it, and then I'll be ready to do my object clone right after. Look at this. Using bots to build bots. All right, come back here. What I'm going to do is capture object. Oh, not yet. I need to click on one of these. Now we're at the page. Now I want to capture object. I'm going to grab this search. I missed it. So again, this is the frustration of doing this. You're going to have to go really quickly in being able to set this up. Let's try it one more time. I missed the account click that we didn't do. I'll just do it real quick myself. This login, man. But I don't have anyone to blame. I'm the one who came up with this as a concept, so it's my fault. All right, I'm going to click on this account. We'll go back, capture object. I'm going to do one capture right here, which is the search. I'm going to quickly copy that. I'm going to do one more capture here. That didn't work. All right, well, anyway, we'll do the search. So my action to take here on the search is going to be to set text. I'm going to here fill in the, let's say, current amount. That's going to return all of the matching transactions. Now, that in itself may not be unique enough in most situations. Here, I know that it is. I'm pretty sure this one's going to work okay. If I needed to be a little bit more specific, I could do like current amount, space, and date, and then look it up that way. But I think we'll be able to get away with just using current amount here. So that part is going to fill in. Let's log into Rusty Bank one more time. I'm going to set this up so we're ready to capture as soon as this thing logs in and we get to a certain transaction. So let's fill this in one more time. I know this is onerous watching me do this, but it's going to be tough for you to do as well. So I feel your pain. We're having the nightmares of this train going. All right, let's type something in real quick. Let's just do 645.88. Perfect. Now let's do a clone of that table. Boom, I can see that I got 2 rows there. What I want to do is I want to get a specific cell by index. Okay, so let's try to do this and we'll see how it's working, and we might have to make some adjustments. Oh, I don't want to set, I want to get cell by index. Get cell text by index is what we want to do. So if I look at this, right, this is row 0, which is my header row. This is row 1, which is my data row. And technically, if we're talking about indexes, this should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the data we want. So we want to do 1, 4. We're going to try this as a test. Before actually doing anything, I'm going to put a message box in here again so that we can see if we're right. If we're not getting the data correct here, then we'll have to make adjustments accordingly. But we'll be able to see kind of what value is getting returned so we know what's coming back to us. So in that recorder field, or in the result of that recorder, I'm going to get that cell text by index. That's going to return to me a string. I'm going to say S current supplier and hit create and select. And then in my message box, I'm going to show current supplier. All right, let's close this window. I'm going to run the bot from start because I want it to do the whole login, and we're going to see how this thing works from start to finish here, or start to where we're at right now. Okay, so it did the login. It's got our first transaction. It's hopefully clicking the account. We might have to make an adjustment here. Okay, so it's having trouble on line 10. Oh, we had this part wrong. So this needs to be our dictionary. I screwed that up. All right, let's go back here. Here is our dictionary. Our dictionary key is going to be, I'm just going to put in current account. Apologies that I didn't catch that right away. This I need to get rid of. I'm going to press F2 again. Here I want to grab current account. That's where we had that screwed up. So this is a bit confusing here, but what we've got is within our dictionary, we're passing the key right here in these curly brackets, and that is going to drive our navigation. I apologize that I had that wrong. I just put in the account there, and of course it's not going to find that as a DOMX path. All right. Hey, that's what happens on a live build. That's kind of a tricky part, right, where you're doing the dictionary tied to a DOMX path. So, you know, lesson learned. That's how it works. All right, so now it found our account. Now it's typed in the amount. It found check number, though. So our index is not really an index so much as a counter. So we gave it 1, 4. What we need to give it is 2, 5. So let's go back out of here. We'll close this guy. And we'll give it 2, 5. And again, the reason being is we thought it was going to be 0, 1 and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 because indexes are usually 0 based. But what it came up with here is it's going to be 2, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the second row. So let's put that 2, 5, and we'll hit save. All right, so that's going to get our value. The last thing we need to do here is then map that back into our other page, which is, browser here. Our financial transaction validation page. We're going to recapture object. Oh, do I not have it open? Shoot, I closed it. All right, let's open that guy back up. Now we can capture that one. Recapture object. We want to fill in here the supplier name. Click right there. Again, this is going to follow the same pattern that we've been looking at already, where we have the HTML ID as an incrementing value. So I'm going to come here and uncheck these other boxes. Don't want the path. I don't want the object ID, or I'm sorry, I don't want the DOMX path. And then this is going to be where I press my $in counter, and this would be dot number toString. There we go. And then my action to take is going to be to set text, and I'm going to set that with my supplier name, or current supplier. Cool. So that will iterate us through all of the transactions. Now, at any point during this looping, right, I could potentially have an error that comes up, right, because that rusty bank is going to eventually error out. So what I want to do here is I'm going to, let's see. All right, I'll show you what we're going to do. I'll launch this. That's not going to work. I'm going to hit run right here. What I want to happen is I want the front part of our automation to run up into this certain point, because we need to get to that 503 train, right? This is like the one time that I actually do need to see it, because we need to click that login button so that we know exactly how to get back on track. Train joke. How to get back on track once this page has timed out. So we're going to let it run here. Now our bot is going to have an error, right? And it's going to have an error on line 11 in this case, just because that's where it was. But we got logged out essentially. So I'm going to close out of this. And if I had let it run, it's going to say, hey, I can't find that text box that I was looking for. Let's go back and review though. Was it doing everything right before that? Let's see. Yeah, so far it was working fine, right? We had 2 of these, got filled in 100% correct. We did have another instance of this page, which I'm going to close. We don't want to have 2 instances of the same page going. But I have this open now, right? So let's talk about error handling. The way that error handling works is we have this concept of a try and a catch. So I'm going to put my error handling over here. And think about where this is going on, right? We've got, this is our counter, so we don't need to loop that, or we don't need that to be in our error handling necessarily. This is our loop of transactions. I don't want to necessarily have an error handler there, or I mean I could, but I don't have to have that. What I'm concerned with is everything that's happening per transaction. So I'm going to add a try inside of here. And I'm going to put all of my logic inside of that try. And what we're saying with the try is, hey, try to execute this. If you get through it, great, you'll move on. If you don't get through it, then we're going to go into the catch automatically. The catch is where I want to do my login. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this actually needs to be my banking application, my rusty bank error. I'm going to capture object. I'm going to click this take me to login page. Okay. And that will let me get back to the login. So I'm going to say click. After that, what I need to do is actually reference my subtask. So I'm going to go to taskbot and then run. And I'll choose my taskbot again. It's the same one we looked at before, my rusty login, right? Because after I've clicked this button, which is my take me to login, it's going to take me back here. And then I'm just logging in again, just like we did at the very beginning of the exercise. There's one more concept though that we have to consider here, right? Let's say that we're on this 3rd transaction and the banking app crashes. And we have just gotten through the point where we captured the payment amount and the checking account, and now we're going to switch and boom, there's the error, right? It failed on line 11 last time. Let's say it failed on line 11 again. If I just go over here and I log back in, right, that's not going to resume where I just was, right? That's not going to let me like keep going with what I was just doing. So what I'm going to do is actually do a loop. And my loop here, I'm going to set for 3 times, right? And to best describe this to you, I would call this a retries left loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say at maximum, I will try the following actions 3 times. If they fail beyond that, what am I going to do? I'll log it, I'll send an email, whatever. but I'm going to have this retries left set to 3. And I'm going to put my entire error handler inside of this. Now, at the very bottom of my actions right here, what I'm going to do is have a break. If I got all the way through here, actually I don't even need this. I can go right here. As long as I've recorded this, I'm going to break. Okay? And that means I'm going to get out of my iteration of the loop. What I'm going to do is actually move this action below my error handler because this page is not crashing, right? I don't have a problem with this page. I only have a problem with Rusty Bank. So I'm going to move that actually outside of my error handler and outside of my loop. I don't need it in there either. And it's a little bit easier to see this kind of stuff if you zoom out a bit and you can see where the white box, which represents my loop, ends, and this is down here. The other thing I don't necessarily need in my loop are these two actions where I'm grabbing stuff from the challenge page itself. I'm actually going to move those up outside of the loop because I only need to do this once, right? I'm going to grab the payment amount. I'm going to grab the account number one time. The only stuff that I want to keep inside of my loop is the stuff that I'm doing inside of Rusty Bank. Okay? The last thing we need to do, and I'm going to zoom back in so you can hopefully see my screen. The last thing we need to do is our submission. I'm going to copy this and put it down here. And for my browser, I'm going to go back to the challenge page itself. Recapture object, the very bottom, I'm going to hit submit. And we're going to test it out. My action to take is a click. So hopefully this made sense to you what we're doing here, right? And I'm going to explain this one more time. I'm going to put it in dual view, see if that helps maybe. So think about this. We're doing our looping, right? And our loop and lookup is what we called it. The first thing we're doing is we're figuring out how many cards are on this page. We come back with 12. We're going to loop through everything inside this loop 12 times. Inside of the loop, we're going to grab the payment amount and the account number for each of those cards. Again, this is per card that we're doing all of this. Inside of that, I have my retries left loop. And my retries left loop is saying how many times am I going to try the following stuff at a maximum. And inside of that is where I put my error handler. So my try here is going to try to click on the account. It's going to try to search the amount. It's going to try to grab that table. And then if I get through all of that, it's going to break me out of the loop, right? I don't need to keep doing this over and over if I got this far. But if I get to here and it fails, or I get to here and I don't get the value that I'm expecting, or it fails for any reason, I've logged out, then what I'm doing is I'm assuming that it must have taken me back here. I'm going to click on that login and I'm going to run my subtask to log me back in. And then because we're still inside that loop, it's going to execute this stuff all over again, right? And I'll be on my second retry. I use this same kind of concept when I'm building like really super important production bots where I'll have this retries left concept. A page doesn't load consistently. A page loads really slowly. I'll try this retry. In the catch, usually I'll add some kind of delay to like give it a couple seconds and hope that it hopefully resolves itself. But I'll use this kind of logic. I'll also log here. So in my catch, I'll do a delay. I might do a page refresh if that's based on the use case. I'll also do a log here, and I'll log that like, hey, tried time 1 and failed, tried time 2 and failed, tried time 3, worked successfully, right? So I'm going to log that so I know that the retry logic is actually catching. And then the last thing we're doing, which is outside of our loop, we can see that by minimizing here and kind of closing that out, is that we will be setting the value for the supplier name back on the challenge page itself. Let me close this one and we'll rerun this one and we'll see how we do. So we're logged in. First transaction is underway. We'll let this keep going. Now, to the point that I made at the beginning of this entire tutorial. Wait, hold on. Let's see. Let's make sure this part works because we didn't test this yet. Okay, so it's at line 13. It's going to fail here, right? Because it's not going to be able to find the table that it was expecting. So here, it was able to resolve that. It clicked on the login. My login logic is running again. It's using that retry concept. I'm going to get back to that same transaction. I'm going to look up whatever that was, and we'll fill it out. We'll see here in a second. It's going kind of fast. I can't really see exactly what's being filled in. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I prefer simplicity in my automation builds over speed, right? And one way that we introduced simplicity, even though I kind of screwed it up, was with that dictionary, right? The dictionary is guiding the way that we click on whichever account that we're using. And so that makes my automation build much simpler, and the logic is simpler, and I don't have all these crazy if statements all over the place and have to worry about like, oh, well, I need to do this for every account, not just this one. So I prefer that kind of approach over like just doing something that's screaming fast and, you know, maybe isn't the most maintainable or the easiest readability for someone else who may be maintaining my automation in the future. I think we're on the home stretch here. It looks like we've got maybe 2 or 3 transactions left. Based on the speed that we're seeing so far, it looks like it's doing about 2 or 3 transactions before it fails each time. Again, we didn't go back to the challenge page in between there because we really can just continue on the banking app. We don't need to re-extract all of those values from the challenge page. There we go. So we got 100%. It took 124 seconds, so just over 2 minutes there. I'm happy with that. I think that's a good result. Mainly I'm happy because my code is pretty easy to understand. It's pretty easy to maintain. If I needed to make changes in the future, like, hey, I want to do more retries or I want to add logging or things like that, it's relatively easy. Last point here. Let me get our slide back up here. I'm going to talk about alternative approaches. These are approaches that I thought of doing at first. These are also approaches that I saw other people trying online. Number one would be capturing all of the transactions up front into a data table and then just going straight to the bank to look stuff up, right? So what that would mean is instead of us doing this inside of the loop where we're grabbing transactional data, we would do all of this up front, just get all of that out of the way, put that in a data table, and at that point, we're just cranking through the banking app and not having to go back and forth. That would be one way that you could possibly shave some time. Again, I don't think it's quite as clean of code personally, but that would be another approach that you could take. Another approach that I saw people take that I actually don't really like is caching the bank's entire data for each account. That's not going to be realistic for much of a production use case. So yes, that does probably work for this exercise and would allow you to go really fast, but that is not realistic of what we would want to see from solving this particular challenge. The other way I would say that I don't have listed here is that I did see some people who were actually just, re-logging into the bank every single time. So for basically 12 times, they're logging into the bank and then closing the window, logging into the bank, closing the window. You could do it that way. It is going to be a bit slower though, because you have to do that login and launch the page every single time. And that is kind of a way to work around the error handling. The concept I really wanted you to see here is how do we do error handling? How do we do that with the concept of looping with that retries left so that we can make sure that our bot's going to be resilient and continue forward even in the face of something not necessarily working. The last point I'll make, and I have beat this one to death throughout this entire session, is simplicity of logic is better than speed for maintainable automations, right? Yeah, something can go fast, but I always want to be considerate of, I don't want my automation to go faster than the application that it's automating on top of can keep up with, right? Because then I'm really going to run into those problems where I need to make sure I'm doing the retries left, make sure I didn't go too fast, make sure that the page is still where I think it is and I didn't lose context. So I prefer the simplicity of logic over anything else. I tried to show you the simplest way that I could think to build out this automation. But let me know in the comments below, what other tips were you finding helpful? What are the ways that you were able to solve this automation? Maybe we didn't even talk about your approach, so I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for playing Bot Games Season 3. Thanks for trying out the Developer Portal challenges. The reason we do all of this is because we want you to have a fun way, a safe way to be able to practice different approaches, learn different styles of handling errors, handling different web interfaces and things like that. So this is all designed to help you learn to be a more effective automation developer. Okay? My name is Micah Smith. This has been another episode of AA Illustrates /Bot Games. Go be great. Hitting the like button on this video will make sure that your next bot build goes perfectly smooth. While that may not be entirely true, it is true that subscribing to Automation Anywhere will make sure that you don't miss out on any upcoming tutorials and bot builds. Go be great!